Hello and welcome to CBC Arts Exhibitionists, the only show on television that features Canadian artists from coast to coast to coast in just 30 minutes. I'm your host, Amanda Paris. We are deep in the slog of winter, and when you're shoveling snow or putting on layer after layer of clothing just to put out the garbage, it can be easy to feel like there's no end in sight. Luckily, I've lined up a full slate of energy, light, and inspiration, the perfect antidote to beat away those winter blues. Today you'll see a drag queen who creates at the intersection of Acadian heritage and queer culture. Professor Lise gives us the 101 on artists who put their lives on the line for the sake of expression. We'll take a wander through the magical spectacle of the Winter Lights Festival. And we'll meet an artist whose collage making is hypnotically meticulous. I hope you're ready for it because I am. This is CBC Arts Exhibitionists.
Acadians are the problem child of Canadian history, but in the best way possible. We basically told off our parents. We were like, no, Mom, we don't want to sign with the English. No, Dad, we don't want to sign with the French. We want to do our own friggin' thing. So we moved out at 16 years old, and we lived on the streets for a bit, and then we formed a community and happy families. We were able to build our society of French-speaking rebels in Atlantic Canada. 1755 is when the English finally decided to deport the Acadian communities across the world. That trauma in history has been passed down, but today we fight for the language and the culture and a lot of cool stuff. It's Chiquita Mare here, and coming live from my bedroom in Moncton, New Brunswick, in one of the many pumping hearts of l'Acadie. Welcome. In 2019, what's an Acadian? As an artist, my queerness was really, really important to put to the forefront. But then I also started realizing that my Acadianness was really important to put to the forefront. One day there was an event, and some of my drag queen friends from Fredericton were in town, and I was like, can you put me in drag? And I was their little drag baby, and they're my drag matantes. And my version of drag is all about self-expression and performance and identity. So what I mean by that is anyone should try out drag, but I also think that drag is an important art form and space for queer people. If I can go out in this armor and be the most queer self that I can imagine or create or perform, then me facing the pressures of society is so much easier. Chiquita is, I've said it so many times, but the cross between a clown and a blow-up doll. And what I mean by that is I allow myself to be super comfortable in my sexuality on stage, all the while being funny and having a good time and making people laugh on stage. I think performance and comedy is such a freaking amazing tool to pass a message because they're laughing, they're having fun, they're enjoying themselves, so the work is in the background. So then the next time you interact with someone who's queer and Acadian, you've already witnessed that, you've already lived that exchange. I think mashing those two identities together allows for an endless well of inspiration and possibilities, because you can take anything out of Acadian culture and ask yourself, what would that look like if it were queer? And then all of a sudden, you get to create something that has never been created. And vice versa, if you take something out of queer culture and you ask yourself, what if that was French or Acadian? How would that be different?
Je pense pas que je continuerai de me laisser faire comme ça. Je pense qu'il est temps que je me réveille, que mon cadran sonne. Et tant que tes conneries, arrête de me taper dans la gueule. Arrête d'épingler les affiches de mes défauts sur les murs que t'as construits.
As queer people, or as francophones, or as both in my case, we are shown that like throughout history we've been marginalized and assimilated into either straight culture or English culture. I don't talk about linguistic duality or like marginalization. I don't talk about it. I just live a version of my Acadian identity that's like super out there. Which in naturally just like shows that I'm not a victim of any of that oppression or any of that marginalization. I'm choosing to look beyond the history of our deportation and the history of our trauma and looking towards the future.
We just launched season 3 of Canada's a Drag, and you can watch 10 brand new episodes right now on CBC Gem. Each week, I introduce you to a different Canadian artist who we've selected to be our exhibitionist in residence, aka the EIR. Throughout the show, you'll see sneak peeks of that person's work, from photography to film, gifts to animation, and this week, Afrofuturist monuments in honor of various African Canadians. Here's the artist, Quentin VerCetty, to tell you more.
Greetings, bonjour, wagwan. My name is Quentin VerCetty, and I am a visual storyteller, and an art educator, and a writer, and also an ever-growing interstellar tree. And my work dances in the realms of Afrofuturism and surrealism as I create neoclassical-inspired monuments of people of African descent. And this was inspired by my travels around the world, where I felt like here in Canada, there's a disproportionate rate of colonial monuments to that of people of color.
Coming up, Professor Lise is here to tell you why this artist is vomiting on people's artwork.
Art is a dangerous game. It's not all Bob Ross. In the right hands, it's a blood sport. And today on Art 101, I'm here to tell you about a bunch of times the artists put their bodies at risk and lived to tell the tale. I'm Professor Lise, not really a professor, and this is Art 101, not really a class. We're here to go on a deep dive of an idea, an artwork, or a story from the art world that's controversial, inexplicable, or just plain weird. Art's always been obsessed by the body, from the Apollo Belvedere to Kim Kardashian's outfit at the Met Gala. But sometimes artists have used their own body as a tool or a medium, sometimes putting it in actual, real danger. Take Canadian artist Taras Poltaiko, who was born in the Ukraine in the 1960s. He moved to Canada, but in the 1990s he went back to Chernobyl, the site of the nuclear power plant that had a tragic accident in 1986. There, he intentionally experienced ambient irradiation, in other words, standing way too close to the site. When Poltaiko got back to Saskatoon, he had some of his blood withdrawn, and he placed it in a nickel-plated bathtub hung from the ceiling, lid on so people couldn't be affected by the radiation. The work, installed in 1996, was called Cradle. Why put yourself in harm's way? Poltaiko was making a comment on the decades-long effects of the Chernobyl disaster and how defenseless our bodies can be against danger at that scale. It's not always so dire, but art can really be pretty graphic. French artist Orlan has made a kind of queasy career out of using her own body, going through various real plastic surgeries in the 1990s to change her appearance and transform her into the kind of idealized woman we've seen in famous works of art. So, in a work called The Reincarnation of Saint Orlan, she set out to have Botticelli's Venus's chin, Mona Lisa's forehead, and the list goes on. The operating room became Orlan's medium, her tools and her studio, in these very intentional surgical interventions that were also performances and artworks. And artists continue to use their own bodies in risky ways to comment or even to protest. You may have heard about Russian artist Peter Pavlensky, who was recently on trial in France for arson. But his setting bank windows on fire in Paris in 2017 was only the most recent of his more startling performances. In 2012, after members of the band Pussy Riot were sentenced to prison for their performance in a Moscow cathedral, Pavlensky sewed his own lips shut in an apparent act of solidarity and defiance. There's debate about works like Pavlensky's. When you create such a dangerous performance with your own body, is it a spectacle? Is it effective or just horrific? Sometimes it's a little bit of both. It can be a bit more fun and less painful. In 1996, Toronto artist Jubal Brown did a bit of gastronomic performance about modern art. He deliberately ingested foods of specific primary colors and then went to major art galleries to intentionally puke on famous paintings. He was making a comment about the banality or the boringness he saw in modern art, specifically those works that make it into the canon and into major art institutions.
How would you feel if somebody threw up on one of your paintings?
Well, if it was a painting which I loved and wanted to keep nice and clean, I might find it an insult and I might want to fight that person. So it all depends on the context, and I would, maybe it depends, but I might feel flattered or I might feel angry.
And despite what conclusions you may come to, his digestive control was impressive. Listen, it's not everybody's jam. Hurting yourself deliberately, or even putting yourself at risk, is not something I endorse or recommend. And in fact, I strongly insist you not recreate, expand upon, or otherwise mess with your highly valuable physical vessel in order to make any art at all. But the next time you're looking at a piece of abstract art with your uncle and he thinks it's a little less than exciting, you can regale him with tales of artists who put their lives at risk to express themselves. See you next time for less blood and gore on Art 101.
Thanks, Professor Lise. We're gonna take your advice and move now from the blood, gore, and vomit into something a little more magical. We're in the drudgery of winter, and light is the one way that we can survive it. You can plug a therapy lamp in your room or just refuse to take down your Christmas lights. But right now, I'm gonna take you on a trip to the Distillery District in Toronto for something truly beautiful, the Winter Lights Festival.
All right, so this is the moment of truth. Hopefully everything's hooked up right and it turns on.
The event is now 4 years old. The Distillery District was cold and empty, and we want to give it some energy and give Toronto some life in the months of January, February, March, and we thought what better way of taking advantage of the darkness than to bring some light right into it. The festival is meant to tell a story, and part of that story is to put a smile on people's faces. Part of that story is to lift people up, it's to inspire people, and my art specifically is about all of those themes. It's a 15-foot laser-cut steel sculpture. It's in the form of the Egyptian Ankh symbol, which is a symbol of life. On the side, it says 29,995 days to figure it out. And in fact, that is the average Canadian lifespan. And we suggest to everyone that they have a limited time here and that they figure it out as soon as they can.
Some of the challenges with this piece is there are 500 pixels that we have to install. We have to make sure that the controller is communicating with every single one and make sure there's no signaling issues. It's pretty high up here. And also, our installation is very high up, so to formulate some way of getting all these pixels like up into the air and making it an easy installation took a fair amount of planning. The idea is that you kind of walk into this experience with all the LED lights, become very relaxed. And we also have a bunch of hanging crystals, so it's supposed to be like a magical experience. It's kind of a relationship between electronics and waves and sound.
It's my first large-scale piece by far, and it was done for Burning Man this past year. And it's made up of about 300 layers of solid core wood panel and glued up in blocks. The light is important. If it were during the day, say mid-afternoon, you wouldn't pick up a lot of the detail, of the collarbone, the ribs, and by accenting her with certain lighting, those details come out. Just about everyone who saw this piece asked me whether or not I was going to burn her. And of course I said, no, there's no way that I would do that. What I want to do is to make her available for as many people in the world to see. So that means all year round, right? Now it just so happens that this is the first exhibit outside of Burning Man that she's been in. Overall, I think she fits in quite well. I love the fact that she has her own little nook, and you can sort of have an up-close and personal experience with her.
Light is just fun. It's not oil. It's not one of the serious canvases that artists use. It's a way of communicating with other people and letting people know that your idea might be serious, but we don't have to be serious in the conversation. It's easy to understand. Flashing lights and flickering lights and easy forms that make you smile. It's an amazing medium.
Coming up, meet the artists who'll have you wondering if you can make masterpieces out of your old magazines.
I got sick of doing the mundane thing where I'd work all day and come home and be lazy, you know? We're living in a time where it's easy to do that. You know, I can paint, I can draw, but something about collage always resonated with me. My name is Jacob Intilé. I'm from North Vancouver, BC. And I'm an analog collage artist. Typically, I will have an idea in my head on what I want to make. A lot of the time, though, I can be just flipping through a magazine or a book and find an image that just jumps out at me. I mean, hence, a lot of these things I have pinned to the wall. Like, these aren't things that I specifically have a reason to put anywhere yet, but I like the way they look. And I'd cut out things that were quite intricate, but I wouldn't have a place to put them. So I started getting these old photo albums where you peel back and you stuff them in there, you close it. You're not losing your tiny little small pieces on the floor that you could have spent an hour or 2 or 3, you know, cutting out. It's all trial and error. A lot of people just assume that it's all digital work. You know, it's a lot harder to cut things out with your hands and glue things down with your hands. There's a lot of technique to it. It's a hobby for me. It's something that eases my mind. I don't really do it for other people. I do it as kind of almost therapy for myself. There's always the pressure to be posting things every day, have content, do this, do that, and that's not really who I am. Bringing something out that I haven't seen in a couple years, it gives me a good feeling because it's almost like I feel the emotions. I know where I was at that time, you know?
Fun fact, Jacob Intilé is one of the 11 artists in our series Paper Cuts, and he designed our amazing series logo. If you have an artist that is lighting up your winter, send me a message on social media. Our handle is @CBC Arts. Tune in next week when we'll be doing another deep dive into the captivating work of Canadian artists. Peace.